when we're experiencing this passionate love phase of a relationship, it is just sprinkling fairy dust all throughout our lives and making us feel like this god or goddess that we have fallen in love with is going to absolutely transform our lives, and nothing will ever be the same again. And it's a wonderful feeling. As I said, one of the most intense feelings of our lives. But unfortunately, the way that our brain is designed, that feeling only lasts about 12 months. And that's a problem. That's a problem because after 12 months, people are saying, oh, I'm not in love anymore. Maybe this is not the right person for me. Um, and that's simply based on a misunderstanding of how love works and how the brain works.
Welcome to I Think I Can podcast. My name is Luella Young. I am a woman who believes that we, like wine, get better with age. Age brings us wisdom, intuition, and a level of sophistication that is beyond the reach of youth. I am here to tell you that living a luxuriously rich and fulfilling life is in your reach. I Think I Can podcast will teach you to think differently in order to get different results. Allow me to show you how to do life effortlessly. This podcast is for the woman who is tired of playing by the rules of society, community, religion, parents, and partners. I Think I Can is all about becoming brave, authentic, purposeful, and strong. Listen weekly and you will find yourself living a life you could have only once dreamed of. Thoughts drive our physiology, so channel your thoughts with me into a life truly worth living. Enjoy the show. Excuse the short little interruption. I just thought it would be important for me to announce that I now have a suite of masterclasses up on my website, which is just luellayoung.com. Type in my name in Google and you'll find all my social media links, etc. But the masterclasses I felt inclined to create because I want to take the client on a journey towards their dream, a journey towards joy, happiness, and peacefulness. And I start the year off in, you could say, the first quarter of the year, January, February, March, talking about relationships, because it's only once we're in a relationship that we really get an idea of who we are, how people see us. And we have to realize that how people see us is really a bit of a reflection of what's going on in our subconscious. Sometimes we don't see our patterning. We don't see how we are, these patterns evolve in us mainly through our upbringings, mainly through our external environments, whether that's societal programming that we've picked up or parental programming. But both of those things sort of take us away from our true self, the essence of who we are. And relationships can really bring that out, how you interact with someone. So January, February, March, we dive into a lot about relationships, communication, even finding your soulmate or healing from an affair. Just take a look. There's classes. There's going to be classes on each, and if you've missed some that have occurred already, you can watch the replay. The links will all still be there. And Yeah, I hope you enjoy taking a look at them and the client journey. And I feel like one of the reasons I wanted to create this is it's much more accessible for people. Sometimes therapy is not as affordable as we would like, or coaching is not as affordable as we would hope. But this might give you a little bit more, more chance to have a greater chance of getting the help that you need on specific topics. So yeah, enjoy and let's begin. Welcome back. Today's podcast, we had the opportunity to talk all about this little molecule called dopamine. And Dr. Lieberman, who is a psychiatrist, explains why some of us have this burning need for more, a strong desire to do more, seek out more, perhaps more thrills, perhaps more money, perhaps more sex, more rock and roll. And Dr. Lieberman does an excellent job of describing why some of us have this and why some of us are maybe just a little bit more happy with just having what's right in front of us, and we don't need all the extra craziness. So sit back, enjoy, and leave a comment if you enjoyed the show. Thanks so much. Welcome back, everyone, to I Think I Can podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Daniel Lieberman. He is an MD and a clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at George Washington University. Dr. Lieberman is the co-author of the international bestseller, The Molecule of More, which has been, well, I should say, yeah, it's all about dopamine and gives a great overview about why we tend to always desire more. And it's been translated into 20 different languages at this point. Now, he wrote another book called Spellbound. This is the most recent book, and it's The Modern Science, Ancient Magic, and the Unconscious Mind. And it explores the intersection of neuroscience and mysticism as it relates to the experience of the unconscious. So, welcome, Dr. Lieberman.
Thanks for having me.
So, I'm not sure where to begin. I'm just going to, maybe talk about what really attracted me to your work was especially the your experience and your knowledge around this very important neurotransmitter called dopamine. Now, let's just well, first of all, why did you get so interested in the science of dopamine?
There were really two reasons. One reason was that it is the sexiest of all the brain chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Dopamine is the brain chemical of sex and drugs and rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that I did want to share some of my expertise as a psychiatrist with the general public. And I have a background in treating addictions.
Mm-hmm.
And dopamine plays a role in other illnesses as well. So I thought, you know what? That is a wonderful place to start. People are going to love it. It's going to be interesting. Let's go with dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
So I started doing some research, reading some journal articles and some textbooks and just filling in some blanks that I had. And I came across some information about dopamine that was just so jaw-dropping. I felt, all right, this does it. I've got to write about dopamine. People need to know about this.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating work. How about let's start with a little bit when it comes to relationships. I really like your your take on, why perhaps we shouldn't be so, I don't know, worried about maybe losing, well, the honeymoon phase, for lack of better way of describing it. Like when we it's not falling out of love, it's just it's not the same type of love. So can you explain how, dopamine's role in that juncture?
Dop- yes, dopamine plays a role in so many aspects of human behavior: mental illness, creativity, focus and concentration,
Mhm.
mastering our environment. But perhaps one of the most dramatic roles it plays is making us fall in love.
Mhm.
Um, I think for many people, that experience of being in love may be the most intense, the most pleasurable experience of their entire life. And dopamine is playing a big role in that.
Mhm.
One of the things that we emphasize in the book is the very special role that dopamine plays in our brains, in our behaviors. And it's very much about the future. We tend to think of dopamine as being the pleasure molecule, the molecule of reward. We get dopamine release and this wonderful feeling of euphoria when we do things like eat when we're hungry, have
Mhm.
sex, win a competition, or fall in love.
Mhm.
But this pleasure aspect of dopamine is really just a subset of what it does. What its main focus is on is making the future better than the present, or to put it another way, maximizing future resources. And that's why we titled the book The Molecule of More.
Hmm.
All right. So what does this have to do with relationships and love? When dopamine orients us to the future, it often orients us to an idealized future. So, for example, if you think about buying something new, a new outfit, a new phone, or some other piece of technology, you tend to view that thing that you're interested in an idealized way, right? Oh my God, I'm going to look amazing in
Mhm.
this new suit. Or this new piece of technology is going to change my life. And we imagine all the wonderful things we're going to do with it. Um, Unfortunately, sometimes once we get it, that idealized future becomes a ordinary reality, and we quickly lose interest in it. But that's the nature of dopamine. So, what it's doing when we're experiencing this passionate love phase of a relationship it is just sprinkling fairy dust all throughout our lives and making us feel like this god or goddess that we have fallen in love with is going to absolutely transform our lives, and nothing will ever be the same again. And it's a wonderful feeling. As I said, one of the most intense feelings of our lives. But unfortunately, the way that our brain is designed, that feeling only lasts about 12 months.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a problem. That's a problem because after 12 months, people are saying, oh, I'm not in love anymore. Maybe this is not the right person for me. Um, and that's simply based on a misunderstanding of how love works and how the brain works.
So it's really what you're saying then, I think, is the dopamine driven response is sort of the unexpected, the unknown. I mean, that's what you're really craving, right? It's not so much um perhaps, hate to say it, but like living with this other person or being with this other person. It's sort of it's more the unknown that it's that you're wanting.
That's right. That's right. In terms of dopamine doing its job as the molecule of more and achieving its goal to maximize future resources, only things that we currently do not have now are of interest to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, if I'm anticipating buying a new television, I'm going to get very excited about it because it's going to stimulate dopamine release. But if I think about the television I have now, there will be no excitement and no dopamine release because there's nothing unknown about that. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
new. There's nothing to add to my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we get this new partner, there's all kinds of unknowns. One of the things we do, to use a psychological term, is we project.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of make unconscious assumptions about this person. And often in the early stages of the relationship, those are idealized assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
This person is always going to be kind. This person is always going to be caring. This person will never have needs of their own. They'll simply fulfill my needs. And of course, none of these things are true. And then once we get to know the person and it becomes a real human being and not a projected dopaminergic idealized creature,
Mm-hmm.
dopamine shuts off. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden the relationship feels very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what would your cure for like the 13th month or um where I see it mainly I would say in most of the couples that come through my door, it's year 12, 13, 14. It's sort of, now we have kids, now we have lots of responsibilities. How do you keep the novelty? I mean, I know this is not like your area of expertise, but based on what your research with dopamine and keeping the love alive, what would you suggest?
Yeah, yeah. So dopamine is the brain chemical of the future. We also have brain chemicals that process the present.
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful of them. It's not
Yep.
just one. And you've probably heard of all of them. Some examples are serotonin,
Mm-hmm.
that processes mood. And that's, of
Mm-hmm.
course, a present oriented thing, how we feel right
Mm-hmm.
now. Endocannabinoid, that gives
Mm-hmm.
us pleasure and bliss, the
Mm-hmm.
brain's version of marijuana. Endorphin,
Mm-hmm.
brain's version of opioid, that gives us the
Mm-hmm.
runner's high.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is oxytocin,
Yeah.
uh, and that's the relationship molecule that
Mm-hmm.
orients our thinking to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, all of these brain chemicals can give us pleasure, but it's a different kind of pleasure than dopamine gives us. Dopamine is a pleasure of anticipation, of
Mm-hmm.
excitement,
Mm-hmm.
of looking forward, and confidence and self-efficacy, and really making things happen to make
Mm-hmm.
the world and our lives better.
Mm-hmm.
The here and now neurotransmitters, they'll give a different kind of pleasure. They give a kind of pleasure of satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
fulfillment,
Mm-hmm.
and contentment.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, for example, you can compare, let's say that you're going out for a run. And you love to go out for a run, and you're going on a special run today because I don't know, it's a race, and there's going to be people cheering and screaming. You're going to get all of this dopamine. You're going to be so excited and you're going to be looking forward to it. You're going to be in action, making things happen. At the end of the run, you're going to have runner's high. And that's going to be a different kind of feeling. It's not going to be about what's going to happen next. It's about how I feel right now. I
Mm-hmm.
feel calm and fulfilled and
Yeah.
and happy, and maybe even blissful. But I'm not going to be looking forward to the future. I'm going to be in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the first step is to recognize that there are two ways, two categories of pleasure that the brain delivers. Passionate love is a looking forward love. It's a dopaminergic, crazy, magnificent, wonderful love.
Mm-hmm.
When that when that sort of burns itself out after a year or 2 years, it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
What you want to do is you want to make the relationship transition to a here and now love, which is
Mm-hmm.
technically termed companionate love.
Mm.
So it's no longer a crazy, I am a god on earth because I'm in love and everything is perfect and amazing and wonderful. It's more this here and now. It's contentment. It's satisfaction. I'm just happy with this person. I feel so lucky to have this person in my life. I
Mm-hmm.
feel fulfilled with this person. And,
Mm-hmm.
and, and we don't need to go out to a bar and dance. We don't need to impress the other person. We don't need to dress up in our sexiest outfits for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
We just be at home in an old ratty sweatshirt,
Mm-hmm.
reading our books together, and
Mm-hmm.
just being happy, satisfied, and content.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to make that transition, and it takes work and it takes maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and our society, our culture is our enemy here
Yeah.
because our culture is very much about the dopaminergic side of being in love.
Mm-hmm.
9 movies out of 10 are going to be about the passionate love. You're not going to see a lot of stories written about the companionate love. Um, I personally don't watch a lot of soap operas. But when I was growing up, I had a friend who loved soap operas.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that they'd be all about these crazy, passionate relationships. And they would form and they'd be destroyed, and there'd be all of this craziness.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a while, one relationship would turn into a lasting one that for years, as the soap opera went on, this became one of the stable relationships. And that was the relationship that successfully transitioned from crazy dopamine passion to here and now contentment. So sometimes we do see this being portrayed. And not to give you a hard time at all, but
Mm-hmm.
it's funny when you asked me what do we do about this dopaminergic love coming to an end at 12 months, you said, how do we restore the novelty?
Mm-hmm.
And we can do that, but I would say that that should not be our goal. Our goal should be to cross the bridge, to successfully transition from passion to companionship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it brought the saying to my mind, like variety is the spice of life. And yeah, I mean, I think we can sprinkle some spice in the post euphoria stage by doing certain things a little bit different. I think it was even in your book that you know you might have just said, like, yeah, take a new pathway home, or whatever it is, or maybe go on a trip, or I mean, if that's something that you crave, variety, then there is ways of bringing that into your relationship, I suppose. But I think what what is what I think our audience needs to understand is that it's not normal to always be on this dopamine driven, like, pathway of more, 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 better, better, better. um yeah, more.
That's right. That's right. My wife and I, we have things that are favorite things to do on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
We have our favorite restaurants. And when we do those things, we get a great deal of happiness and satisfaction, but we don't get any dopamine.
Right.
If you want dopamine, you've got to do something different. You've got to do
Mm-hmm.
something you've never done before. And it's risky because you go to a new restaurant, the food may be terrible. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of work. If you want to do something
Mm-hmm.
you've never done before, like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, take a
Mm-hmm.
bike trip or who knows what. It's a lot more planning than just going out
Mm-hmm.
and doing something you've done 100 times before and is so easy.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you can use those things to inject a little bit of dopamine into an established relationship. And that can be nice. That can be fun.
Mm-hmm.
That can reignite some of that passion. But that should be a side dish. The main course should be the strengthening of the relationship
Yeah.
of this passionate relationship, which
Mhm.
maybe the way I'm describing it, it doesn't sound as much fun as passionate love, but it can be a wonderful thing. It's having another person's life deeply entwined within your own. It's knowing there's another person in the world that you can trust, that you can always go to, and who always has your back.
Yeah, exactly. Those last 3 words, "always has your back," or 4 words, is exactly how I think when people ask me, "How do I know?" Like, how do I know? Should I stay? Should I go? Should I marry? I mean, do you have that deep sense of this person having your back? And yeah. So, and that might change over the course of years together. And when you realize that maybe we are different people now, then I think it's, um, that's your sign to maybe take a closer look at this relationship, and it might have evolved a little bit differently than what we have expected. So, like when we talking about relationships, you also mentioned agentic versus affiliate relationships. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yes, one of the things, some of the feedback I've gotten about this book is that people say to me that it makes them much more aware of what's going on in their own brain as they go through life. And
Hmm.
there are times when we are in a dopamine state, and there are times when we are in a here and now state. And I think that one of the ways that's most crystal clear is with agentic versus affiliative relationships. So, what are these things? Well, an agentic relationship is interacting with another person in order to achieve some goal. So we do this when we're at work. We knock on the door of our coworker and we say, "Hey, I got a question. Can you help me out?" Or "I'm having some trouble with this project." Or "Let's get together and brainstorm some ideas." Those are all agentic. They're for the purpose of something. When we get together with a friend and we say, "Hey, let's plan a weekend trip to New York City." That's agentic because you're planning something together. It's working with another person for the sake of bringing something about in the future. And
Mm.
because it's future oriented, it's dopaminergic, and that should lead to some excitement and anticipation and some good experiences like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, uh, I don't hear you. Your audio just went off. No, no. Oh,
Okay, I think you can now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Good, good.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, great. All right, so we can cut all that. Yes.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
All right. So with agentic relationships, we get anticipation as we look forward to some exciting future that we're working towards, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
successful project at work or some weekend plan, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Affiliative interactions, on the other hand, are in the here and now. And that's really what we talk about when we think about social interactions. It's interacting with another person for no other purpose except to enjoy the present moment.
Mm.
So we engage in affiliative interactions. We're just hanging out with a good
Mhm,
friend just to have fun. We're
mhm,
hanging out with a family member that we just enjoy spending time with.
mhm,
And it can be helpful to sometimes ask ourselves, okay, what am I doing right now? Am I dopamine or here and now?
mm,
Because as I mentioned, we tend to live in a culture that really promotes a dopamine approach to life and in some ways devalues the here and now approach.
mhm,
And so we may be with our family at the end of the day, and it really should be a time for just enjoying each other's company
Mhm.
but we can't get out of the dopaminergic mold. And we're thinking about, oh, what do I need to do at work tomorrow? What errands do I need to run? All of these
Yeah.
dopaminergic thoughts of the future. And I think that we are not as good at learning how to just enjoy that present moment.
Okay. Yeah. It's something that we need to train ourselves to do a better job at. Is I mean, what you're just kind of expressing to me is it, what everyone says is finding your happiness in the here and now,
Yeah.
in the moment. So how about I think what you're also saying, that this is part of our uniqueness, our biology, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about addictions in this sense as well. That like like some of us, some of our minds are, pre-programmed to crave more, desire more. I mean, I've I can think of a few professions. Like, I mean, after you, as you know, after you see enough patients, over the course of many, many years, I find that I have certain people with certain professions coming into my office. Some professions may be more indicative of um, addictions, others more indicative of perhaps, or I should say indicative, correlating more with ADD, or yeah, in adults. For example, I think, I've been with some surgeons, and they have that, dopamine driven, like, I want to do more. I want, like, these are the people that love jumping out of planes and right.
They like to get in and fix the problem right now. Let's
Y-
get it done. Yeah,
yeah.
surgeons tend to have a lot of dopamine.
Yeah. So how let's talk about addictions, because I know you've done a lot of great work, for the US government in this area as well. And wh- to me, it's almost like the perfect storm. It's not just trauma in childhood. It's not just lost connections. It's not just, my biology of it being more dopamine driven. Don't what's your sense? I feel like it's just a perfect storm. Or what I've seen too is sort of like getting in with the wrong crowd, and all, what would seem to be just a fun thing to do on the weekends have now become a habit, and we saw that with COVID as well. So what's your thoughts?
In psychiatry, we tend to use what's called the biopsychosocial model.
Mm,
And I think we'll be interested to unpack that in the context of addictions.
okay.
Basically, what it says is that all mental illnesses have a biological component, typically genetic, a psychological component that focuses on a person's upbringing, and a social component that looks at their current environment.
Mhm.
So, with addictions, the biological is that some people are genetically predisposed to be more vulnerable to addictions. Um, they tend to release more dopamine in response to drugs of abuse. And in many cases, they don't experience the subjective negative consequences of it, like feeling sick the next day. And I think you know who I'm talking about here.
Mhm.
Do you remember that kid in high school who loved to drink and he could drink everybody under the table?
Mhm.
Well, now we know that he probably had an alcoholic father and perhaps some alcoholic uncles,
Mhm.
um, that what we call an exaggerated hedonic response to a drug, saying, "Oh my God, this feels so great." That's
Mhm.
genetic. That's
Mhm.
genetic. And I'm sure you've had patients who have told you, "Oh yeah, I tried cocaine once in college and I didn't really care for it and I never did it again."
Mhm.
That's also genetic, except on the flip side, the luckier side. People
Yeah.
who will do a drug of abuse and it just won't do anything for them, and they really have extremely low vulnerability for developing an addiction.
Mhm.
That's the biological. Psychological. Um, People's upbringing does have a big influence on how their brain develops. And one of the important things in life is being able to derive gratification from healthy sources, being able to find satisfaction and happiness in things like work and exercise and healthy relationships and just playing.
Mhm.
Um, if you had a punitive childhood in which you were belittled and told that
Mhm.
you're no good, if you weren't taught how to have fun in healthy ways, you might not have access to these
Mhm.
sources of gratification. We all need gratification in our lives. And so if you don't have healthy gratification, it's
Mhm.
pretty likely you're going to turn to unhealthy gratification, drugs
Mhm.
of abuse. And then finally, there's the social component, and you said it yourself. If you get in with a bad crowd, if your
Mhm.
peers are using drugs, you're going to use drugs
Mhm.
because human beings are social animals and we want to fit in.
Mhm.
And then there's also the gratification side of things. If you live in the inner city where there are no parks and there are no lakes to fish or other fun things,
Mhm.
maybe all you have is drugs.
Mhm.
Um, and so the social plays a role in addition.
Right. So it is like a combination of all these things.
It's the perfect storm, as you said.
Yeah. Okay. Um so again, it's sort of when some people that don't have that need to have more, like they're just satisfied. Like some people might call it boring, but they seem to be able to find the happiness in the present. What while others don't, like what do you think the answer to that is, in terms of trying to trying to achieve more happiness in the moment and not always wanting more?
Yeah. Well, you know what? To answer that question, I think it would be helpful to sort of divide people up into categories with regard to their dopamine functioning.
Okay.
So the first split that we can make is between people who tend to lean more on the dopamine side compared to people who lean more on the here and now side.
Mhm.
And as you mentioned, people who lean on the here and now side, um, they're not sensation seekers. They're
Mhm.
not going out to clubs, listening to loud music,
Mhm.
seeking casual sex with new partners.
Mhm.
They're staying home, curled up in their favorite chair, um, with maybe a partner they've been with for 5 or 10 years,
Mhm.
and they're in their old sweatshirt and they're very, very content.
Mhm.
They get a huge kick out of picking up the telephone and calling their mother. Instead
Mhm.
of doing shots on the weekend, they're going to
Mhm.
spend time gardening and
Mhm.
growing
Mhm.
fruits and whatever it is that. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
So these are going to be very content, very calm, and perhaps very boring people. All right.
Mhm.
On the other side, we got our dopamine people. This is going to be a little more exciting. And we let's divide up our dopamine people. First, we want to divide up people. Now, I should mention that there are different dopamine circuits in the brain. One circuit is a very ancient circuit that's deep inside the brain. Technically, it's called the mesolimbic
Mhm.
circuit, but I like to call it the desire circuit.
Mhm.
That's the dopamine circuit that makes us want stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the dopamine circuit that gives us pleasure when we achieve things or when we're about to achieve things. This is a circuit that we share with many animals. It's really a mammalian, even a reptilian circuit, responsible for motivating us to do things that will promote evolutionary goals, staying alive and reproducing.
Mhm.
There's another circuit, starts in the same place, very deep in the brain where dopamine is produced. But this one comes up to the prefrontal cortex, the most advanced part of the human brain. And this is the circuit that makes us uniquely human. Technical term is the mesocortical circuit.
Mhm.
I call it the dopamine control circuit because we use it to control our environment. Just like the desire circuit, it's focused on the future, but it's looking farther into the future than the desire circuit is. So the dopamine desire circuit might say, whoa, I could really go for a donut right now. But the control circuit will say, you know what? We may enjoy it in the near future, but in the farther future, it's not good because we're going to gain weight and it's going to be bad for our health.
Mhm.
The control circuit is also the circuit that allows us to imagine different kinds of futures. When we imagine a future, and it could be something very simple. What would my future be like if I went grocery shopping today instead of tomorrow? All right, we're imagining a hypothetical situation that doesn't exist. Being able to work within our brain with things that don't have a physical existence is enormously powerful. And that is the reason why human beings have mastered this planet, because that allows us to start to formulate the laws of physics, the laws of
Mhm.
chemistry, mathematics. It enables us to work with abstract concepts like justice and beauty and goodness and truth.
Mhm.
So this is an extremely powerful circuit. All
Mhm.
right, now we can begin to think about what people are going to look like if they have high levels of activities in these different circuits. Somebody with a very high level of activity in the desire circuit might be kind of hedonistic. They might
Mhm.
be a pleasure seeker. They might be a thrill seeker. They might like to jump out of airplanes,
Mhm.
go to clubs, drink alcohol, use drugs, eat fatty foods, have
Mhm.
sex with lots of partners.
Mhm.
Somebody who's got a highly active control circuit, though, they're going to be just as focused on the future as the hedonist is, but it's going to be a different kind of future. This is going to be the type A workaholic.
Mm.
This is going to be the person who is just at work all hours of day and night. This is the person that we said in the book, the person most able to afford a vacation home on the beach is going to be least able to enjoy it, right?
Right.
You can't have this kind of person sitting out on the beach reading a book and just taking it easy. They have brought their laptop and they're
Mhm.
not enjoying the wind and waves. They're
No.
thinking about next quarter's profit statement.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Other highly dopaminergic people are going to be creative types.
Mm.
The writer who will lock themselves in their room and not come out for days. Not
Yeah.
showering, not changing their clothes, maybe not even
Mhm.
eating.
Mhm.
Inventors are like this. Sometimes
Mhm.
scientists can be like this.
Mhm.
They just
Mhm.
absolutely get obsessed about their project.
Mhm.
All right, so I I just want to sort of wrap up this discussion by saying it's the dopaminergic people, the workaholics, the passionate artists, inventors, and scientists who change the world. Oftentimes, they often get rich too, but in most cases, they're not happy.
Mhm.
And we look at these people, the CEOs, the Nobel Prize winners, the celebrities, and we often envy them.
Mhm.
But that's probably a mistake because
Mm.
these people generally aren't happy. And
Mm.
the reason is that if they had the brain circuits to be happy, they wouldn't be famous because it's only the dissatisfied who put in the insane amounts of work and hours that it takes to become a CEO or a celebrity or a Nobel winning scientist. It requires dissatisfaction to have that drive to keep you going. The boring here and now people who are sitting around gardening and chatting on the phone with their mother and their friend from 20 years ago, they're not going to get rich. They're not going to get famous, but they are going to be happy. and they are going to live a satisfying, fulfilling life.
Mm.
So, I think there might be very rare exceptions where people have both. But for
Yeah.
the most part, it really is one or the other. And the sad thing is that I think that most people choose dopamine over happiness. They'd
Mm-hmm.
rather have the money, the fame, and the accomplishment and sacrifice their happiness. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I deal with my patients. The high-powered lawyers who are
Yeah.
addicted to the massive paychecks, but they're absolutely miserable working 70, 80 hours a week and basically having no time to enjoy the fruits of their labor.
And so that does make me think too. It's true what they say. If you're addicted in one area, you're often addicted in other areas. So if you're addicted to the paycheck, you have this probability or propensity to be addicted to perhaps drugs or other things. Yeah.
Buying things, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, cocaine, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's worth pointing out that if you look at the great people of our culture,
Mm-hmm.
the celebrities, the politicians,
Mm-hmm.
we're sometimes surprised to see that the people that we look up to the most often do horrible, terrible things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the most powerful people in our society, the celebrities, the politicians, the business leaders, it's not uncommon that all of a sudden they're in the newspaper for doing terrible things,
Yeah.
sexual harassment, sexual
Yeah.
abuse, theft,
Mm-hmm.
fraud, all these kinds of things. And we go, oh my God, why did they do that? And then before we idealize them and now we hate them.
Right.
And we shouldn't do that. We need to accept the fact that just like one addiction leads to other addictions,
Mm-hmm.
one form of dopamine leads to other forms of dopamine.
Mm-hmm.
People who are great in both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And when we see someone like Kanye West, for example, or
Lance
Weinstein,
Lance Armstrong that you mentioned in the book as well.
yes, Lance Armstrong,
Mhm.
uh, we should not be surprised
No.
when they do terrible things.
Mhm.
And we might want to give them a little bit of a break
Mhm.
and say, you know what? A lot of this is their biology.
Yeah.
And some of these people benefit the human race in incredible ways. And
Exactly.
we've got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
And Einstein, Einstein benefited the human race in unimaginable ways. And he was also kind of a jerk. He was married a number of times and cheated on all of his wives, and cheated on his girlfriends. And um, they seem to go together. Great people tend to be jerks on average, unfortunately.
Yeah, Buzz Aldrin as well that you mentioned and how he went into depression and yeah.
Marriages, divorces, alcoholism. Yeah. This is a guy who had so much dopamine, he got himself to the moon. Um,
Well,
and when he got back, people said, what did it feel like to walk on the moon? That must have been a life-changing experience. And Buzz Aldrin said, that was just something we did. And now we should do something else.
right. Yeah.
Always
And
the future, never satisfied, never fulfilled.
I really enjoyed your chapter on domination because you talked about dominance again related to dopamine and then there's the submissive person, which is probably more correlated with the here and now hormones that you mentioned. And the perfect balance is right. It's what we're all trying to go for. I thought of the monarchy when you said that. It's sort of like dominating, powerful, yet like noble and what was the other word that you used?
Courtesy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Dopamine is interested in dominating its environment. but it's not interested in dominating other people simply for the sake of dominating other people.
Yeah.
That urge comes from other brain chemicals such as testosterone.
Mm.
That's just an aggression neurotransmitter.
Mm.
Dopamine is not an aggression neurotransmitter. Dopamine just wants to get the job done.
Mm.
And so, in a lot of cases, people with high levels of dopamine will actually act in submissive ways.
Mm.
So, for example, we imagine the fictional super spy 007. All
Mhm.
right. This fictional character would be imagined to have tons and tons of dopamine, right?
Mhm.
Very practical, no emotion, no relationships
Mm.
except for casual Bond girls. Just
Mhm.
get the job done. All right, so let's say that 007 is trying to break into a building and
Mhm.
he's snooping around and he runs across the janitor. How's he going to behave towards this janitor? In a domineering way or a subservient way? A
Subservient.
subservient way. He's going
Mhm.
to be nice to him.
Mhm.
He's going to, oh, how do you do, sir? Wow, it's
Mhm.
so nice to see you. Boy, you're working so hard. He's going to flatter him because dopamine is not interested in dominating the person. Dopamine is interested in dominating the situation, getting
Mm.
the goal accomplished of getting into that building.
Mm.
All right. And so highly dopaminergic people, highly accomplished people often act in this way. Um, y- you know, the assistant manager is probably going to be a lot more aggressive to you than the CEO. It's
Yeah.
very like the CEO is going to be very polite, very nurturing, very kind. He wants to know what your thoughts are. He's not going to be
Mhm.
telling you his. And the word courtesy, which is what this is all about, is
Mm.
based on the root court, as
Mhm.
in the nobility. And so,
Mhm.
as you point out, the nobility, the royalty often
Mhm.
behave this way. I just saw this little clip of Prince William, and he was doing some charity thing,
Mhm.
meeting the commoners, and Prince William was constantly bowing.
Mhm.
The crown prince was bowing to the commoners
Mhm.
because that's how highly dopaminergic, highly cultured people act.
Mm.
They know that they're going to get their way. They're going to accomplish their dopaminergic goals by treating other people in this very courteous, subservient way.
And I'm glad you made note of that because it's not to say that, high levels of dopamine mean that you're a bad, ADD, even narcissistic person or anything like that. It's not ego driven. It's just desire driven. And correct?
Yeah,
Like
it's just very much being focused on the future,
yeah.
focused on um, maximizing resources.
Hmm. So I want to be mindful of time here, and I want to ask you about what led you to write your second book then, Spellbound, where you now transitioned into dopamine, into more of the unconscious and mysticism surrounding that.
Yeah. So a lot of readers told me um, that it was life changing for them to start to view their brain in a more objective way.
Mm-hmm.
To ask themselves in different situations, what's primary right now? Dopamine here and now, and just to kind of get a sense of what it
Mm-hmm.
feels like to have different circuits in the brain active, and to start to interpret one's experience and one's life through that lens. So for my second book, I wanted to take it to a much more sophisticated level. The molecule of more is just about one single neurotransmitter, and
Mm-hmm.
that's dopamine. But of course, the human mind is infinitely more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
When we get to that level of complexity, we can't rely so much on neuroscience. And the reason is that neuroscience is at a very early stage of its development. I've read that many people believe that the brain is the most complicated structure in the universe. And our tools for understanding it from a scientific point of view are still very primitive,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking. So we need other tools. And those other tools are the tools of literature and art. Humankind has been fascinated with its own mind for millennia, since we became conscious of our own selves. And prior to the scientific age, efforts to understand humanity were done through storytelling. Um, so these stories, I call them crowdsourced stories because they were told in the oral tradition. If you write down a story, it's kind of frozen, it's petrified. That's how it is. Stories in the oral tradition are told slightly differently every time they're told.
Mm.
And they are unconsciously influenced by the audience's reaction. And so that means that over the course of centuries and millennia, these stories are modified little by little to become more and more faithful reproductions of the drama that goes on inside the human mind. Now, if you look at the stories that we still tell today that are the oldest, they tend to be about supernatural creatures. And the reason for that is that the most moving, most compelling stories are about our unconscious minds, the massive aspects of our brains that we have no control over. And these stories are about the supernatural. They're about magic for two reasons. One is because the part of our brain that is the unconscious is far more powerful than our conscious brain. And we can see this when we're overcome with an emotion.
Yeah.
We spoke about love. You know, that you can't control that. That's something that happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have experienced inspirations that have changed their life.
Mm-hmm.
Some people routinely get gut feelings that represent information processing that their conscious brains aren't capable of.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this unconscious part is far more powerful than the conscious part. And the other thing about it is that it's outside of our control. The very best of us, we can't call up at will. If you're an athlete, you never know when you're going to give an inspired performance. If you're a writer, you never know when you're going to have an inspiration for your next great work. If you're a psychotherapist, you never know from one session to another when your contributions to the patients are going to be valuable or not, right? It's not just a rote thing. You
No.
need to be inspired, and you have no control over us. All right. The best of us is outside of control. And at the same time, our worst enemies is almost always ourselves. And that is our unconscious mind sabotaging our lives and sometimes absolutely destroying us. All right, so we've got this incredible, powerful entity that sometimes changes our lives for the better, sometimes destroys our lives. What is that? Those are gods and goddesses, right? Those are magical creatures. And so these stories that represent the best, most sophisticated understanding of the human mind are stories about gods and goddesses, because those aspects that are hidden in darkness are so much more powerful and so uncontrollable. And that's why it's about magic. If you want to understand the deepest aspects of your brain, of your mind, the place to turn to are stories about the supernatural.
Interesting. So how has that changed your life, studying more about magic and the supernatural, in terms of, getting more, let's say, control of your mind? Because you're right, it can be your best friend or your worst foe. I always say it
Yeah. Yeah.
stops you before you start sometimes.
Yeah, in our modern post-enlightenment world, we are expected to understand everything in logical, rational terms.
Mm-hmm.
And the term magical thinking is disparaging. It's an insult. Oh, he engages in magical thinking, and the implication is he's an idiot. that's not a productive way of going through life. Um, Sometimes, not always, but sometimes thinking about things magically is actually a more productive way than thinking about them rationally. Now, we know it's not true. We know magical thinking is not true. Let me give you an example. Superstition is incredibly powerful. Some of the most superstitious people in our culture are also the most successful. And these are elite athletes and elite performers, musicians, etc. Um, and they are superstitious because they find that engaging in these superstitious rituals actually lead them to perform better. As a scientist, I would say, yeah, that's because what they're doing is they're recruiting unconscious circuits in their brain in productive ways. But if I were to say to them, hey, I would like you before your next baseball game to recruit unconscious circuits in productive ways, they're going to go, what the hell are you talking about? That is completely unhelpful. But if I were to tell them, no, 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 don't do that. Before your next game, wear your lucky shirt, they're more likely to have a good game.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody does this. There was a study of college students, and something like 90% of them engaged in superstitious rituals prior to an exam. When the stakes are high and our control is low, superstition comes out. A first date, a job interview, an exam, a big presentation. I gave a TEDx talk once, and I practiced that for a month. And when the dress rehearsal came, I drew a blank, and it was a nightmare. And before I went out on the stage for the real thing, I said to my unconscious mind, hey, help me out. I can't do this alone. We're all in this together. And so basically, what I acknowledged is that there's kind of this entity in my brain that's separate from me. It's outside of my control, and it's got the ability to make me successful or a failure. And I made a decision to treat it with respect and to acknowledge its role.
Yeah.
And that was a kind of a superstitious thing to do. But I know we're running out of time, but
Yeah.
here's how I look at it. Here's how I look at it. This table, okay? I go through my life treating it and thinking about it as if it were solid, but it's not. It's not. It's 99% empty space. It's made up of these ghostly fields of quantum probability. I know that's the truth, but it doesn't make sense for me to go through life constantly reminding myself that solid objects aren't really solid, because my brain evolved to treat them as if they were solid, and that's the most productive way for me to think about them.
Right.
One of the things I'm trying to communicate to people with Spellbound is that your brain evolved to understand yourself and the world in a magical way, and it's counterproductive to fight that. What you want to do is get sophisticated at understanding magical traditions, because that's an understanding of the hidden aspects of your own brain.
So it sounds to me like you're sort of you what some people would say is more spirituality, but seen through a scientific lens.
I think so. I think so. I write about psychology, and
Yeah.
that is, what is our subjective experience?
Yeah.
And psychologically, most people have had spiritual experience where they have felt as if they had some contact with a non-physical being. Now, did they really? I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. And science has no way of testing that.
Right.
And so, in some ways, to me, that's not an interesting question, since it cannot be tested, it cannot be studied. And so, I'm just content with the psychological. Psychologically, it's real because we actually experience it, and I'm
Yeah.
content to stop there.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to end. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating work that you're doing, and everyone, I would highly suggest, if you're interested in any of what our topics were today, to grab one or both of Dr. Lieberman's books. And he does a lot of great work, or you can view a lot of his work through YouTube as well, if that's more your mode of extracting information. So we'll link all of that to the show notes. And anything else you want to end on, Dr. Lieberman?
Simply to say thank you for having me on your
Mhm.
show. It's been a great pleasure.
Well, it's likewise. So everyone else, have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last, because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye-bye.